The wind slid over the valley in long invisible chords, thrumming against the dunes the way a bow teases a cello, and the sand answered in low, ancestral tones. Nights here were blue-black and sequined, the sky stitched wild with stars that seemed to pulse in time to a secret metronome. In the hush before dawn, when the goats still slept and the embers of the communal fire wore a crust of ash, a shepherd named Nu would stand on a lonely rise and watch the world breathe. He was neither tall nor short, neither loud nor haunted by silence, but he carried inside him a restlessness that felt older than the red cliffs to the east. While other men counted their flocks or argued over whose spear had struck a gazelle first, Nu listened to the valley's heartbeat and imagined it was the whisper of the one who made heartbeat itself possible. He had known stories of that one since childhood, stories that wandered like traveling merchants between the clustered tents. In the beginning there was only water, they said, or only barren darkness. Depending on who was telling and how much fermented date wine had warmed his tongue, but in every telling a single commanding voice had carved order from chaos. Older shepherds swore by the idols propped on carved stumps outside the main tent, rough wooden torsos with bead eyes and mouths forever open in surprise. Offer oil, they said, and the idols keep the wolves away. Burn incense and the grain grows fat. Nu's father used to nod along, but afterward he would sit in the shadows sharpening a knife, muttering that a god who needs smoke and oil is no god at all. When Nu was 10 his father died from a spider's fever. The boy spent a moons turning in raw grief, and when grief settled into memory the only thing left of his father was that whispered skepticism. Nu carried it like a sliver beneath the skin, an irritation that never let him trust wood or stone shaped by clumsy human hands. Years layered over each other like dried hides. The tribe prospered in average ways, enough births to offset deaths, enough barley to trade for copper blades, enough tales of heroic hunts to keep adolescent boys swaggering. Yet the elders' hearts curled tighter around those wooden idols. Every generation they found fresh names for the same old block of cedar: Wad for the god who smiled on fishermen, Suwa for the goddess of lovers, Yagath for the warlike bull, Yok for the fleet stallion, Nasser for the vigilant eagle. As long as the names kept rotating, the elders claimed, the deities stayed alert. But Nu, grown now into a man with sun-whittled cheekbones, tasted something rancid beneath the shifting names. One dust-striped afternoon he dared to ask the high elder why Wad required a cut of the spring harvest when children in the far tents coughed seam-ripped lungs from hunger. The elder's eyes flashed like flint, and a dog somewhere barked as though echoing the old man's outrage. That night, in the thin dark, Nu dreamed of water. Not the familiar trickle of the two rivers that forked around the settlement, but an ocean of impossible volume roaring down from a height beyond horizon. He stood knee-deep in grass when the first silver wall appeared to the west, curling like a fist. He woke choking on his own breath, sweat brining his ribs. When dawn finally lifted its bruised eyelids, the ordinary reed roofs looked somehow frail, one gust away from flight. For days the dream tugged at his thoughts, and with it came a voice clear as riverglass: warn them. Nu tried to drown the command in the ruckus of daily chores, patching a water skin, wrestling a buckling rope, bargaining for salt. Yet every task felt suddenly trivial, a frantic sweeping of hearth dust while an earthquake readied beneath one's feet. At last, jittering with urgency, he rose at midday assembly and spoke. What spilled out was no prepared sermon but a cracked open flood of conviction. People, serve Allah alone. The idols you carve cannot hear your pleas, the gold you melt into false faces cannot steady the earth. I saw a flood in my sleep, water like night itself, and in the swirling dark I heard the mercy of Islam calling us to turn back before that mercy must manifest as wrath. Heed the Quran that descends upon my heart. The assembly stilled the way dune grass stills when a predator's paw presses the soil. Then came laughter, quick and harsh. A woman fanned herself with a woven palm frond and muttered that the young shepherd had inhaled too much goat musk. The high elder switched his gaze between the soot-black cooking pots and Nu's open face, as though weighing which was more absurd. You, he said finally. You claim revelation? His lips twisted at the word's audacity. 40 winters we sat under these stars, boy, and not one has fallen to tell us what we do not already know, which is that a man must feed the gods for the gods to feed him. Nu's heart ricocheted but held firm. He had expected scoffs, he had even entertained the possibility of violence. What he had not prepared for was the hot ache of their indifference. It felt worse than hostility because it implied that nothing he said could shift the needle of their desire. He retreated that evening to the riverbank, feet dangling in water that flowed past thorn bushes toward distant delta flats. He repeated the words of the voice aloud, quietly, so as not to scare off the small frogs blinking under reeds, and each repetition lessened the tremor in his spine, the way striking a steel blade repeatedly can temper it. Weeks turned, and he spoke again and again. Each call met a wall of polite scorn. Some among the youth found his conviction exotic and followed him for the unfolding drama, but their appetites were short. When no earthquake split the ground and no angelic trumpet shredded the sky, they drifted back to wrestling and date wine dares. Na, meanwhile, discovered that faith did not require confirmation to remain alive. In fact, it burned hotter against the ice of communal apathy. He found himself stepping into a private rhythm, prayer stitched through his hours like silver thread through a tattered cloak. It was in that suspended space, lonely yet luminously charged, that he received the command to build. It arrived as images first, cedar beams driven upright into thirsty earth, ribs of a colossal hull stretching like the skeletal remains of some prehistoric leviathan. The voice followed, patient but edged with finality. Build an ark in the open valley where your people pass daily to market, where even the lazy eyes of habit will be forced to register an absurdity too large to ignore. But, my lord, Na whispered, staring at his blistered hands, I have never wielded more than a shepherd's crook. Yet he felt the permission to learn, to err, to try again. Islam means surrender, he reminded himself, and surrender is not passive, it is the wildest leap of agency a mortal can attempt. He started with sketches scraped into packed dirt, translating spectral blueprints into lines his eyes could follow. Wood was scarce in that region. Traders hauled bundles of cedar and acacia from high northern forests, demanding bright linen in return. Na had no fortune, only the goodwill of 2 cousins and the wary interest of a carpenter whose business had lately slowed. He bartered his goats one by one until shepherding became impossible, then he offered songs for labor, spinning verses of the one's mercy until the carpenter's skeptical grin loosened into something like hope. When the first upright beams clawed at the sky, children pointed and squealed. Men paused, hands on hips, weighing whether ridicule came cheap enough. A rumor sprouted that Na was building a monument to himself, and the rumor arraigned him more viciously than any formal accusation. He felt the sting but returned each time to the mantra breathed in his ear, build and warn. Build and warn. The Quran's verses rose like war drums in his chest, and we sent Na to his people, and he said, O my people, worship Allah, you have no deity other than him. Surah 23 pressed its letters against the parchment of his mind. Summer matured into an anvil of heat, hammering the valley each afternoon. The partially raised hull shimmered in the distance like a hallucination. Na's skin cracked, oozed, healed, cracked again. Yet each sunrise pulled him forward as though the earth beneath his feet had turned to a conveyor belt set by divine hand. One evening, while he hammered a cross-beam, a group of elders approached. Their robes fluttered like disgruntled birds. The high elder spoke first, voice syrupy with derision, fine vessel, shepherd. Planning to sail the desert seas? Laughter rippled through his entourage. Na turned, sweat obscuring his sight, and he almost answered in anger. Instead, he inhaled until the anger collapsed into something sharper, resolve. A day is coming, he told them, when these sands will thirst for higher ground and only those who have boarded will taste safety. One elder spat, another barked a laugh so hard his shoulders shook. They walked away, leaving footprints that the wind erased within minutes. But a boy remained, scrawny and wide-eyed, a nephew of Na's late sister. His name was Yasin, and he carried a heart unscarred by cynicism. Uncle, he asked, will the animals travel with us too? The question startled Na with its depth. It assumed that the ark was real, not folly. He knelt, wiping sawdust from the boy's hair. Yes, he said. The conviction in that single word passed from man to child like a torch in darkness, igniting wonder. Yasin returned each dawn to fetch water, to hold boards steady, to learn names of every nail. Others slowly joined. A widow whose prayer beads had broken, spilling 49 polished seeds across the dirt. A one-eyed fisherman who saw better through faith's monocle than his mocking friends saw with both. Yet for every new pair of hands, 10 more tongues wagged behind them, branding not everything from mad poet to malicious heretic. They prophesied inevitable collapse of the hull, and when the hull held, they prophesied the collapse of Na's mind. Meanwhile, the sky wrote its silent assurances, no thunder, no flourish, only the unchanging fact of sun and moon cycling, while somewhere beyond the visible spectrum the decree of Allah coiled like a waiting storm. By the time the keel stood completed, stretching longer than the line of tents, variables in village life began to twitch. Sheep miscarried in alarming numbers, river water fluctuated, foaming strangely at dawn. Old fishermen pulled nets heavy with eels they had never seen. The elders held emergency councils but concluded that the anomalies were tests from their idols, proof the gods desired fatter offerings. More cedars were carved into figurines, more incense burned until the air itself grew thick with scent of denial. Na felt the nearing pivot the way migratory birds sense a season before it shifts. One pre-dawn hour he experienced a calm so total it shocked him awake. He went outside and the stars sewed bright zigzags overhead, but the valley smelled wrong, like river mud warming under a feral sun. In that silence the voice came again, no longer whisper but bell, the time approaches. Gather pairs, warn once more, and seal the ark. He listened, heart alive coal, and understood that surrender sometimes culminates in irreversible action. He would speak one final call at high noon when every tribe member, idolater, skeptic, half-believer could hear. His chest tightened at the prospect. He thought of his father's skepticism coiling into a promise fulfilled in his son. He thought of Yasin's small fingers tracing the grain of the hull. He thought of the elders who would laugh even as the first fat raindrops darkened the dust. But sunrise had not yet broken. For a moment longer Nuh stood alone with the hush, daring to believe that mercy still outweighed wrath. He closed his eyes and recited verses of the Quran that spoke of gardens beneath which rivers flow, of believers greeted by peace on every tongue. And when he opened his eyes, the valley looked exactly the same. Only Nuh knew it was already changed beyond reckoning, because the decree had passed from word to imminence, and imminence is the final breath before reality steps into form. The noon sun climbed until it pressed the sky flat, a molten disk squeezing color from everything beneath it. Shadows bled away, leaving the valley naked in a light so stark it seemed to scrape rather than illuminate. Into that glare Nuh stepped, dust drifting from his robe with each stride like sheared petals. He walked the long aisle between tents until he reached the flat rise where the elders handled disputes. From there, the half-finished ark crouched in the background. Gigantic ribs arcing outward as if the vessel were some primordial creature stretching after a millennia-long sleep. A hush followed him, the way a desert stills when a hawk's silhouette passes overhead. Then whispers budded, tiny, brittle, needing only a nudge to burst into laughter. Nuh did not shout. His voice rode the heat in an even tone, and somehow that calm cut through the murmurs more effectively than a bellow would have. People of the valley, he began, my plea stands as it has always stood. Turn your gaze to the one whose mercy outpaces all storms. Cast aside the idols. Nothing carved by human ambition can shelter human frailty. He let the words settle, felt them settle in himself first. Conviction anchored them, heavy as iron ballast. He spoke of Quranic verses that arrived like lanterns in the dark. Of Hud, of Salih, of prophets whose warnings had once risen like dawn but whose nations chose dusk instead. Do not douse the sunrise with disbelief, he urged, and a tremor of something fear or maybe longing rippled the crowd. The high elder shifted where he stood, face drawn tight like an untuned drum. We tire of riddles, shepherd, he said, bitterness flecking each syllable. If doom comes, let it come. We have crops to water and children to raise. A wave of affirmation pulsed outward, shoulders lifted, chin set as though the elder's words were a shield. Nuh felt the wave break against him and roll back, leaving his feet firm in sand. He raised his hand. Then witness, he said. The decree is sealed. The flood will arrive. Heads tilted skyward in instinctive reflex, but the dome above remained blank, only that merciless sun, only cloudless hush. Someone snorted. Another spat at the dirt. Yet a sliver of quiet hovered over the marketplace afterward, an unease that lingered like smoke long after the fire has been doused. That night, winds carried scents foreign to this valley, wet cedar, mountain loam, the metallic hush that precedes lightning. A low muttering rolled across the horizon. Not thunder, exactly, but the rehearsal of thunder, as if clouds were testing their throats. Yasin woke to the sound and hurried to Nuh. Uncle, the sky is speaking, he whispered. Nuh looked past the boy's shoulder. In the far west a bruise-colored smudge blurred the stars. No rain fell yet, but the river's surface quivered though no breeze touched it. He knew then that time had stepped from warning into fulfillment, the way a seed splits its husk and can never again be stuffed back into dormancy. At dawn, he gathered those few who had kept faith. Yasin, the widowed woman with beadless string, the one-eyed fisherman and his shy daughter, a copper-skinned mason who spoke little but whose prayers burned wordless and bright. Together they loaded supplies, sacks of pungent dates, bundles of dried figs, clay jars of river water drawn before it turned brackish. They ferried grain into sealed compartments within the ark's belly. With each armful Nuh felt history hinge, each sack was a vote for a future only these handful of hearts could yet imagine. Then the animals arrived, or rather, they revealed themselves as though an unseen conductor had flicked a baton and the world obeyed. Jackals padded in pairs, narrow shoulders rippling beneath dust-colored fur. Ibexes trotted down from crags most men had never climbed. Birds settled in flurries along the freshly tar-coated rail, hoopoe with crowns like amber flames, emerald bee-eaters shimmering as if carved from jade. No whip, no rope, no corralling shouts, just calm, peculiar order. People watching from tents stumbled over curses, their ridicule caught in their throats. But the order was not without wounds. A teenage boy, calloused palms, gap-toothed grin, broke from the watchers and grabbed a gazelle's slender neck, declaring it too fine a feast to waste on delusion. Yasin reached him first, pleading, "Brother, let it go, its place is chosen." The boy shoved him aside, eyes wide with hunger masquerading as bravado. Na stepped forward then, not with anger but a sorrow that filled his chest like floodwater. "This creature is entrusted to us," he said. "Release it." The boy hesitated, conflict flickering across his features, then contempt hardened them. He spat near Na's feet and yanked the gazelle away. The animal shrieked, a sound too human in its panic. The crowd laughed in relief, any mockery preferable to confronting their own trembling certainty. That evening, the boy developed fever. By dawn he was ash-pale, delirious, and the gazelle he had claimed lay lifeless at his bedside, eyes already dull to onyx marbles. His family wailed, but none connected fever to sacrilege. They blamed desert spirits, bad water, anything but the possibility that Na's warnings held weight. 2 mornings later, the sky ruptured without ceremony. Rain hammered the valley in sheets so dense they resembled walls of molten glass. It did not begin with gentle drops, the way polite storms announced themselves. It plunged headlong, claws out. Within minutes the parched dust turned to viscous sludge. Rivers, once languid, bulged beyond their banks, swallowing reeds and goat pens. Children shrieked first with delight. Rare rain was cause for dance, but shrieks warped into terror when wind slashed tents from their stakes and hurled them like discarded petals. Inside the ark, the wood groaned as first torrents slapped against hull planks. Na stood on the ramp, cloak thrashing, calling still, "Come, all who believe, board now in the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful." His voice, though nearly drowned by roaring sky, carried a resonance deeper than thunder. Some men staggered toward him, mud sucking at their ankles. They stopped short, eyes darting between ark and idols they had erected atop hastily stacked crates to keep them from rising water. Torn between faith slow to bloom and tradition that had fed them since birth, they froze. Na saw their struggle and felt his heart fracture along fault lines of compassion. Still he beckoned. Near midday the current coursing down central pads reached knee-height. By mid-afternoon it swallowed waistbands. Cattle brayed, roped corals snapping, hoofs flailing in sudden river. Mothers clutched infants above their heads, faces streaked with rain and grit. Yet when Na shouted again, "Enter the ark," the high elder half-submerged, beard plastered to his chest, still raised a quaking fist. "If your Allah loved us, he would part these waters," he screamed, sputtering. "Or we shall climb the hill and meet him there." Somewhere in the roar a chunk of hillside, waterlogged and heavy, sheared off and crashed between them, sending a geyser skyward. The elder recoiled, shock-etching his features as if for the first time he saw the difference between a carved block of cedar and the living force that now rearranged the earth. Na felt Yasin tug at his sleeve. "Uncle, we must seal the ramp," the boy pleaded, eyes wide not with dread but the terrible clarity children sometimes possess. Indeed, the water was licking dangerously close to the entrance. Na looked once more at the valley, at tents reduced to drifting debris, at faces half-hidden by wreckage, then raised his palms. Rain pounded them like nails. "My lord," he whispered, words sheared down to bone, "I have called until my throat tore. Accept whom you will." He signaled the mason and the one-eyed fisherman. Together they heaved the ramp upward. It thudded into its groove and the carpenter's apprentice, a wiry girl with arms corded by weeks of labor, drove in the final pegs smeared with pine tar. Darkness settled inside as the storm outside raged brighter than noon. They lit oil lamps strung along support ribs. Flames flickered, casting blood-orange halos over animals huddled in stalls. The widowed woman whispered verses, "In the name of Allah be its course and its mooring." Na repeated the line aloud, voice catching. The ark lurched, an almost hesitant shift, then rocked as unseen currents lifted its massive weight. A collective gasp rippled through passengers, human and beast alike. Timber groaned, joints creaked, ropes sang under tension. But the structure held, every peg and plank narrating months of faithful toil. Outside, night fell, though the deluge made it feel as if stars themselves had melted into the flood. Through a small oculus Na glimpsed the valley, now an inland sea, broken only by tips of acacia trees stabbing upward like pleading fingers. Lightning revealed corpses of idol statues bobbing helplessly, their wooden smiles waterlogged. Somewhere in that churn the high elder's voice still drifted, sermons turned to panic prayers, then to silence. Inside, fear found its echo in every heartbeat, yet alongside it ran an undercurrent of eerie peace. It was like standing within the very chest cavity of faith, listening to history resculpt itself around them. Na moved among the passengers, hand-brushing shoulders, offering the only balm he possessed, verses folded into soft hums. Even the jackals quieted as if language itself exhaled from his lips, soothed hunger and instinct. Overhead, thunder rolled on, but a new sound joined it, the steady inward breath of the ark's timber as it accepted the water's full embrace. Days blurred. They could not count them, the sky remained occluded, morning indistinguishable from dusk. They marked time in chores, feeding animals, mending lashings, reciting portions of Quran as lanterns guttered and were refilled. At intervals the ark collided with floating wreckage, snapped beams, woven baskets, impossibly a lone clay idol whose features had melted to an abstract smear. Each thud sent shivers up the hull, reminders of what the world outside had become. Yasin once asked if those drowned might still find mercy. Na pressed the boy's damp curls and answered with a verse of assurances, Allah's justice is perfect and mercy is written above wrath. Yet, he added, mercy sometimes arrives as a warning we refuse. And sometimes it arrives too vast for human comprehension. The boy nodded, not fully grasping, but storing the answer in that mysterious vault where children keep truths they trust more than understand. On what would have been the 10th sunrise, had sunrise still existed, the rain ceased as abruptly as it had begun. Silence descended so total it felt heavier than the storm. The sea still churned, heaving under ghost winds, but from the ark's deck oval hewn into roof boards the passengers glimpsed a strange luminescence, a muted glow filtered through slate clouds like dawn glimpsed from beneath deep water. They waited, breath hitched, but no more heavens cracked. Only the hush, colossal and raw. Within hours the clouds thinned to rags, light ambered, revealing miles of undulating water flecked with debris. The world looked newborn, still slippery with afterbirth. Birds within the ark stirred, wings rustling, awakened by some ancestral cue. Na climbed to the small upper hatch and pushed it wide, a wind smelling of silt and drowned memory poured inside. He breathed it, ached with it, then offered a prayer of gratitude, forehead against damp wood. But the journey was not over. Water still stretched in every direction, horizon seamless. Thou fluttered among the faithful like moths drawn to lamp flame. What if the ark outlived its welcome, adrift until supplies waned? Na sensed the tremor, called everyone to center walkway. Lamps clustered into a constellation above them, and in that warm glow he shared the story of Yunus in the whale's depth, of Abraham walking through fire unscorched. Faith, he said, is not outrunning uncertainty, it is sitting beside it and singing until your song outlasts the dark. His words filled timbers, reverberated in joists, perhaps seeped into water beyond hull walls. They resumed routine, cleaning stalls, rationing grain, teaching children to read shapes of letters on scrap parchment fixed to beams. The widowed woman sewed strips of cloth into a tapestry depicting a tree whose roots coiled around the Kaaba, a place she had never seen but believed her fingers might reach if her needle remained steady. The carpenter's apprentice carved a small plaque inscribed with the Shahida. She wedged it above the main corridor so every passerby touched it out of habit, as though to check that reverence did not slip between planks. One afternoon a raven Na had kept for insect patrol fluttered restlessly, beak tapping at the upper hatch. He opened it and released the bird, watching its black arc against brightening sky. The raven circled, then vanished east. Days later it returned, croaking, feet muddy but with no twig, no sign of landing. Soon after, Na sent a dove. This time the creature returned clutching an olive leaf, glistening and fresh. A collective sigh trembled through the ark, relief braided with awe. Ground existed somewhere, seeds still rooted. Life, green and insistently gentle, had survived the crushing flood. Even then they waited a cycle more, caution tempered by obedience to the voice that had guided them thus far. Finally the order came, subtle as dawn yet unmistakable, disembark in peace. Na repeated it to the passengers who gathered at the ramp, hearts drumming. Outside, water had retreated to pools between rocky outcrops. Mudbanks steamed under newborn sun. The ark, grounded at last upon a high slope Judy, some would later call the mountain, rested like a gnarled monument to endurance. Na descended first, feet sinking in loam. He knelt, palms pressed into earth that pulsed faint heat as if still remembering the sea's weight. Tears streaked dust on his cheeks, and his whisper was both gratitude and confession. My lord, your promise is true. Behind him, animals spilled in orderly waves, rushing toward shrubs budding neon green against blackened soil. Children laughed, laughter this time not brittle but bright with incredulity. Yasin splashed through ankle-deep puddles to inspect clusters of wildflowers already unfurling. The widowed woman took off her sandals and stood barefoot, eyes closed, letting mud ooze between toes as though grounding herself in the first page of a rewritten world. Na watched, a fullness expanding in his ribs until it hurt. He knew memory of drowning would haunt future nights, that whispers of lost neighbors would sometimes weave into wind and keep him sleepless. Yet woven through that ache ran a current of tranquil certainty. The narrative of Islam had moved through him, through them, as storm through canyon, carving new shapes meant to house rivers for generations yet unborn. Somewhere beyond the slope, water still receded, revealing landscapes none had mapped, new deltas, fresh terraces, perhaps shards of forgotten idols half buried in silt. The future unfurled with both promise and question. Na turned his face toward that horizon and felt a subtle smile curve, not of triumph but humble anticipation. Survival, he realized, is merely prologue. Now comes the harder art of living worthy of survival. The mountain's flanks steamed for weeks after the waters withdrew, exhaling warm mist that carried the mineral scent of stone newly birthed from the flood's dissolving embrace. At dawn thin snakes of cloud draped the ridges, and when the sun's first blade cut through, each droplet scintillated as though jewels had been strewn across the high terraces. The survivors woke to that radiance and discovered how silence could be symphonic. Insects ticking inside shrubs, goat hooves clacking on raw rock, the distant boom of felled trunks as torrents farther below still rearranged valleys none of them had yet seen. They had stepped, quite literally, into the afterword of their own history, and the ground beneath their worn sandals felt both tentative and shockingly alive. Yasin was the first to climb beyond the ark's resting shelf. He returned breathless, palms scraped, eyes humming with what he had witnessed, rivers drawing quicksilver ribbons through mezzanines of black silt, hillsides crusted with salt crystals that refracted noon into prisms, and most miraculous, groves of saplings already unfurling neon green leaves in ravines where sunlight pooled like warm milk. Life was not merely resuming, it was accelerating, as if creation, having been rolled back to a blank page, now hurried to write itself anew before the ink of potential evaporated. Now gazed over the expanse and felt both exhilaration and an undertow of dread. He had shepherded these souls through catastrophe, but survival was a prelude. Guidance did not end at disembarkation. The Quran's verses rose unbidden, the way distant surf sometimes speaks inside a shell. Say, my Lord, cause me to land at a blessed landing place. You are the best of those who give lodging. The echo of Surah 23 rang steady. An anchor amid the newborn world's dizzying promise. Yet every promise conceals a snare. While water had scoured idols from pedestals, it had not scoured yearning from human marrow. That yearning could bend toward worship or weave again into the same old fetishes carved from fear and convenience. The ark itself became their first village. They sawed away its roof planks, fashioning lean-tos that jutted like swallow nests along the ridge. Animals roamed in loose but respectful distances, pairs of gazelles cropping the tender shoots that rose through mud, ibex balancing on cliffs, birds peppering the sky with triumphant scribbles. The carpenter's apprentice organized a crew to salvage beams, turning ribs of the vessel into footbridges that spanned the runoff channels, still gouging runnels deep enough to swallow a child. Each evening, as lanterns flickered inside makeshift shelters, the widowed woman would hum the rhythmic cadences of recitation, and gradually the others joined, their voices layering like weft on warp until the mountainside thrummed with remembrance. Yet under that hymn a splinter of unease worked deeper. The one-eyed fisherman, unaccustomed to heights, stared often at the lowering clouds that bunched beyond the western horizon. Storms brewed there, he warned anyone within earshot. Perhaps the sea regrets its retreat. Others shrugged, busy coaxing seeds from packs, wheat, barley, lentils saved by miracle of foresight into terraced beds scraped from hillside. The mason discovered pockets of red clay perfect for bricks and spent afternoons molding them, palms shaping each block as though cupping fragile birds. He spoke little, but when he lifted a brick to the sun, his expression was a prayer in itself. Ask the earth for shelter and it will lend you bones. One morning Na gathered everyone at the largest clearing. By then their numbers could form a ring 2 people deep. He stood on a slab of basalt turned dais and let the hush build until even the goats stilled as if instinct knew sacred timbre. A covenant, he said, voice carrying over wind that tasted of impending rain yet bore no threat. Between us and the most merciful, we are trustees of what remains. We will sow without arrogance, eat without gluttony, build without forgetting the architect of measure and balance. He paused, scanning faces, sunburnt, tear-lined, fiercely awake. No idol of stone or sentiment will claim the gratitude that belongs to Allah alone. Most nodded, some wept. But across the ring a young man, the fisherman's nephew, tall, shoulders knotted with new labor, shifted his weight, uncertainty rippling his features. His name was Cabell. He approached Na after the gathering, gestures taut with withheld questions. Na led him to a jut of rock overlooking the churning lowlands where drowned forests still protruded like rib cages. Kabal's voice broke free, trembling with equal parts reverence and rebellion. You speak of gratitude, yet my uncle dreams each night of waves returning. Fear claws him awake. If mercy guides us, why does dread stalk even the spared? Null listened, feeling the boy's sincerity like a pulse under fragile skin. Fear can be a lantern, he answered. It shows chasms where complacency might step. But fear untethered becomes its own idol, hungrier than idols of wood. He quoted a verse, verily, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. Kabal's gaze dropped to his callous palms. He nodded, but the nod was hesitant, like a promise made in half-light. Seasons wrestled in quick succession as though the planet too was recalibrating. Rainstorms barreled through corridors between peaks, drumming new rivers into being, then abrupt drought baked the mud into crocks of cracked porcelain. The settlers learned not to measure weeks by the moon alone but by the behavior of soil, when it exhaled steam, when it swallowed seeds without return, when it split and begged drink. Through it all, Nuh moved among them, guiding, adjudicating disputes, reminding with gentle persistence that Islam's heartbeat in submission to justice and humility. If barley lumped poorly, he oversaw redistribution. If goats trampled seedbeds, he negotiated paddock boundaries. Governance grew organically, less a hierarchy than a constellation orbiting his quiet gravity. But constellations can wobble. One sultry dusk, Yasin stumbled into camp hollering for help. He had tracked a pair of leopards prowling near the lower terraces only to discover something stranger, a ring of clay figurines partially buried in sand, their crude faces marked by slits for eyes, their bellies smeared with goat fat. Smoke drifted from a makeshift altar of stacked firestones. On the stones lay feathers and dried petals arranged with unsettling symmetry. Nuh arrived at the site with a lantern that threw jittering halos across statuettes, so primitive they looked birthed from children's nightmares. Who fashioned these? He asked, though the night offered no answer. When dawn broke, they returned with the community. Gasps burst like ripened pods. The widowed woman crossed herself with trembling hand, instinct from older faiths resurfaced. Kabal stood apart, jaw clenched, gaze fixed on the tallest figurine whose surface bore fresh thumbprints. Nuh noted the boy's stillness. It was a silence that screamed. He addressed everyone. These shapes invite the same error that drowned our kin. They promise mastery over what unnerves us, storm, hunger, death, yet they exact payment in freedom of spirit. Destroy them. Some obeyed immediately, kicking clay into shards. Others hesitated, superstition bracketing their motions. The one-eyed fisherman protested in hoarse rasp, if fear made these, breaking them may anger whatever fear seeks to appease. Nuh knelt in front of the older man, eyes gentle. Only the Almighty commands fear or peace. If we render our dread unto mud, we deny the hand that rescues. They scattered the fragments into ravines where water still trickled, consigning them to erosion. But the discovery cracked open a fissure, suspicion fertilized gossip, and gossip fertilized division. Whispers coiled like smoke through lean-tos about Kabal's scene shaping clay near the riverbank, about the fishermen's nightly mutterings to unseen powers, about Nuh's authority beginning to look more like law than counsel. Days later, Kabal confronted Nuh openly. In the community circle he stood, shoulders squared, eyes flashing with the burned copper of zeal. Your intent may be pure, but we labor under rules none of us inscribed. Is faith truly submission if forged by another's vision? Murmurs rippled. Nuh felt a weight descend, not anger, but grief for how quickly grateful hearts can petition for new chains when liberty feels like lonesome vastness. He spoke carefully, each word tested before release. Submission to Allah is no man's decree, it is woven into breath. I am reminder, not sovereign. Yet community needs structure lest stronger devour weaker. The Quran teaches balance, measure in trade, equity in justice, compassion braided with discipline. We wrote no charter beyond those verses. Kabal's jaw twitched, but before he could reply, a tremor quivered underfoot, tiny yet enough to jolt memories of the flood. Conversations broke apart as eyes scanned slopes for fallen rocks. The tremor passed, but its echo left hearts palpitating. Conflict deferred but not resolved. That night, lightning spiderwebbed distant horizons, revealing a storm system grumbling back toward the mountain. Panic flared embers in dry straw. Some argued the tremor and storm were omens, price of smashing idols. Others believed they should rebuild offerings to placate looming wrath. Kabal rallied a small cohort, mostly adolescents hungry for agency, urging them to seek alternative rights beside Nuh's monotheism, not against it. He phrased it like diversification of spiritual harvest and insurance policy for fickle skies. Nuh learned of the faction at dawn when Yasin burst into his shelter with news of footprints leading to a gorge thick with fog. The boy's cheeks glistened with dew and tears mingled, betrayal stung him personally. Nuh breathed deep, feeling the old shepherd's instinct to fetch stray ewes. He summoned the community to prayer first, reciting Surah 91, by the sun and its brightness and by the soul and the one who proportioned it and inspired it with its wickedness and its righteousness. The recitation poured like balm, though worry prickled underneath. He followed the tracks with Yasin and the Mason. They found Kabul and a cluster of youths in a clearing where geothermal vents puffed warm steam, primeval and eerie. Clay idols, freshly shaped, ringed a pit into which they cast aromatic herbs, smoke curling skyward as if attempting conversation with the clouds. Kabul's expression when he spotted Na mixed defiance with relief, as though he had summoned opposition to validate his rebellion. "We do not renounce Allah," he announced, voice shaking only at the edges. "We honor the unseen guardians he appoints." Na walked forward until steam glossed his beard with moisture. "Guardians need no image," he said quietly. "Angels serve unseen because visibility breeds confusion. An idol today is tyranny tomorrow." The youths shifted, some glancing at smoldering statues already cracking from heat. Lightning rolled overhead, closer now, thunder like heavy carts over bridges. Na lifted his palms. "O my people, your heart was meant to house infinity. Why chain it to clay?" He spoke not as prosecutor but physician diagnosing wounds. A hush followed, punctuated by wind drawing exclamation through jagged rocks. Then the sky released a single thunderbolt that speared the ridge behind them. The ground bucked, a boulder sheared off and crashed into the pit, smashing idols in plume of sparks. Kabul fell backward, eyes wide with animal terror. In seconds rain sluiced down, fierce yet brief, drenching cloth and ash alike. When it ceased, steam rose thicker, as if earth sighed in relief at its own exorcism. Na knelt beside the shattered clay, fingers tracing fissures that still radiated heat. He whispered a verse people close enough could hear: "Falsehood is bound to vanish." The youths, sobered, helped stamp out smoldering herbs. Kabul trembled, tears indistinguishable from rainwater. He looked at Na as if asking how to mend a fabric torn by his own eager hands. Na offered no lecture, only an embrace so tight the boy gasped. "Repentance," he murmured, "is the art of turning while breath remains." He guided them back to camp where the widowed woman had brewed thornflower tea and the carpenter's apprentice arranged dried figs in bowls, a feast modest but laced with welcome. Over the next moon the fracture sealed gradually. Kabul volunteered for most menial tasks, cleaning latrines, hauling fresh water from springs a mile below. Each night he recited verses beside Na until memory engraved them onto his tongue. The fisherman's nightmares subsided after Na taught him to breathe Quranic cadence into insomnia, each exhale a surrender of fear's claim. When the first true harvest bloomed, wheat heads bending heavy, barley awash with gold, the community held a feast not of excess but gratitude. They ground grain between basalt stones, kneaded dough, and baked flatbreads on inverted pans over ember pits. Children chased each other through tall grass, goats nibbled stray chaff, birds bartered song for crumbs. As twilight indigoed the sky, Na stood at the center, watching lamplight glimmer in eyes no longer shadowed by doubt. He recalled the valley once drowned, the idols bobbing like wreckage, the ramp ceiling shut amid torrents. Now laughter floated where laments had sunk. The covenant felt etched deeper than words, inside calluses, inside the very bread's warm crumb. Yet even in sweetness Na sensed the narrative's forward pull. Humanity would scatter, populate lowlands when waters fully receded, shape languages, raise cities, forget, remember, forget again. He was not naive, he knew cycles obeyed gravity of desire. What mattered was seed memory carried in collective marrow, that once the world reset to water and one arc rode its arteries, one community lived Islam as verb, not relic. Their story would tumble through generations, distorted perhaps, but kernel true. That night, after fires dwindled to red pearls, Na climbed alone to a crag where wind sang through volcanic fissures. Stars blazed uncannily bright, as if the sky had been scrubbed of grief. He prostrated upon cold stone, forehead pressed to earth, and in that eclipse of self he heard again the voice whose first whisper had shattered ordinary days. "Peace upon you, noble shepherd. You have labored and we have accepted." Tears warmed his cheeks. Rising, he looked across terraces where sleeping families curled under woven blankets, and in their stillness he glimpsed tomorrow's caravan of prophets, scholars, artisans, dreamers, all bearing the impression of this night like watermark on parchment. Far below, nascent rivers carried silt toward ocean basins still settling. Frogs croaked hymns older than scripture, constellations wheeled as patient scribes. The wind shifted, smelling of cedar and possibility. Na inhaled until lungs ached, exhaled, and stepped back toward camp where dawn, invisible but inevitable, already adjusted the world's light. The mountain's spring thaw came early the following year, and torrents sluiced down gullies that had once carried only dust. Meltwater threaded through the terraces with the quick, laughing urgency of children loosed from chores, and every rivulet left behind ribbons of silt the color of cinnamon. The settlers learned to read that water as one might decipher script. Its speed predicted the fertility of each plot, its turbulence foretold how fiercely the season would test their new irrigation dikes. They laid woven reeds along channels so that runoff frothed into lace and spilled gently onto barley seedlings. It was a choreography half-engineered, half-entrusted to the mercy of Allah, and it worked, proof that faith and craft were not rival arts but mirrored halves of the same single-eyed needle pulling the thread of survival through time. By midsummer the first true granaries stood, adobe cones capped with cedar shingles salvaged from the ark. Women sealed floor seams with bitumen and pressed thumbprints into the glaze, marking each joint the way a potter might sign a vessel. Those thumbprints became a kind of unofficial record, the settlement's census etched into mud, the very skin of the people permanently fused with the architecture of their new world. In the evenings the wind swept uphill smelling of hot grain and wet clay, and Noah would stand at the ridge to watch smoke spiraling from hearths. The community's hum reached him, shouts of shepherd boys corralling goats, the rhythmic thud of mortars, the occasional drift of song. He felt the flood's memory rising in him like tides that still obeyed a drowned moon, but he also sensed history pivoting away. Calamity had once been the drumbeat guiding their every prayer, now the drum paced softer, and another rhythm was taking hold, ordinary life. Between dread and routine lay a perilous zone, he knew, because to be merely comfortable is to risk forgetting why the covenant matters. As if to illustrate the point, a caravan of strangers arrived one dusty dusk, ragged survivors who had tracked bird flight and watercourses up from the lower plains. They walked with the wariness of wolves freshly unsnared, though their eyes shone desperate with hope. The settlers offered water before questions, and only after thirst eased did the leader speak. She named herself Samira, once a date orchard matriarch from a place the sea had swallowed in a single night. Her people carried relics, a bronze incense burner, a child's ivory comb, shards of a mirror glimpsing still the terror-frozen sky. When Samira saw the upright ribs of the ark repurposed as granary braces, she wept, not in grief but in awe that something designed for temporary salvation had become foundation for the daily miracle of bread. No welcomed them, and their arrival swelled the settlement's population almost by half. New languages echoed among the slopes, vowels shaped by coastal humidity, consonants clipped by mountain air. The carpenter's apprentice, now a master in her own right, rehearsed their dialects while measuring beams, turning building sites into classrooms. Yasin, taller now and sinewed, mapped pasture routes and found that the newcomers' goats produced milk richer than the valley stock. Crossbreeding began, and children giggled at the strange, tricolored kids bounding through millet rows. But Samira's people also brought stories of other enclaves farther east where despair had fermented into militancy, where chieftains claimed the deluge proved the gods' jealousy and demanded tribute to stave off future cataclysm. These chieftains minted clay coins stamped with storm clouds and fashioned clay idols with shark-tooth crowns. Samira's nephew, Idris, described one such leader who styled himself Lord of Tides. He teaches fear as if it were a cudgel carved from his own spine. Null listened quietly, feeling history's wheel notch into a groove he recognized all too well. He convened the elders, who now numbered representatives from each surviving clan, and raised the question of outreach. Some argued they were barely a generation removed from disaster and had no resource to spare. Others feared bringing swords to their doorstep. Na countered with a verse, "Invite to the way of your Lord with wisdom and beautiful exhortation." Surah An-Nahl 16:125. If we do not share guidance, he said, we risk hoarding it like grain till it rots. The council resolved to send a delegation bearing seed grain, manuscripts of memorized Quranic passages inked onto scraped hide, an invitation, not coercion, to join a covenant of gratitude rather than terror. Yasin led the envoy, flanked by Idris and the mason who carried bricks impressed with the settlement's thumbprint seal, tokens of peaceful intent. They descended through ravines carpeted now in heliotrope and lupin, following the tributary that once drowned their ancestors' tents. The trip lasted 13 days, long enough for calluses to sprout on palms and used to the constant balancing of load poles across shoulders. Yasin wrote daily notes on birch bark, and his letters drifted back via messenger hawk. We found terraces abandoned, idols toppled yet not destroyed. Fear lingers like a ghost gnawing its own bones. And later, we approached the stronghold of the Tide Lord. Drums carry over the floodplain at dusk like a pulse too large for one heart. Those left behind kept vigil each dawn and dusk, faces tilted to whichever horizon felt heavier with possibility. No in particular felt the delegation stretching from him like a nerve. Every breeze seemed to translate itself into news of their welfare. He spent hours beside the widowed woman, now grandmother to 3 babies, copying verses onto new parchment. They chose ayahs that braided warning with mercy, fragments from Surah Hud, Surah Al-Araf, Surah Yunus. The act of transcription steadied the pulse of waiting. When the delegation finally returned, 6 weeks after departure, they marched beneath banners stitched hastily from undyed wool, banners of truce. With them came 40 displaced families, eyes weary but unhounded, and behind those families trudged a pair of oxen dragging a cart heavy with clay statues shattered at the neck. At the procession's rear walked a gaunt man shackled in vine rope, the Tide Lord, stripped of his shark-tooth crown. Idris explained that after days of dialogue under an umbrella of watchful spears, many in the Tide Lord's own retinue rebelled against his rule of fear. They demanded he witness a community thriving under a creed of compassion. He surrendered, Idris said, voice quavering with something between relief and disbelief. His crown is now broken, shards will grind into paving. Yet victory bore caution. Na ordered the prisoner's rope replaced with simpler cotton bounds, humane, symbolic rather than punitive. He stood before the Tide Lord, who shook with equal parts rage and shame, and recited a verse, "The servants of the most merciful are those who walk upon the earth gently, and when the ignorant address them, they reply peace." Surah Al-Furqan 25:63. The chieftain's shoulders slackened, tears streaked the salt crust on his cheeks. Something unclenched, whether heart or pride, none could say, but the community felt the atmosphere lighten as though some unseen door had swung wide. A season of assimilation followed. The newcomers introduced coastal salt curing, extending the life of mutton beyond the first frost. They gifted songs whose melodies surged like surf. In return, they learned the mountain lullabies that had grown from the original ark builder's prayers. Children toggled fluently between dialects, scattering hybrid slang across threshing floors. Yet integration also surfaced old fractures. Some earlier settlers worried their lineage would dilute, others fretted that leniency toward a conquered tyrant might invite future tyranny. It was Cabell who spoke loudest against resentment. During a moonlit council, his voice rang steady. "We were spared to model mercy, not museum it. If we cannot host those who once wielded fear, we prove ourselves fearful still." It was a remarkable pivot. This boy who had once sculpted idols now sculpted arguments for grace, proof that repentance is a vector, not a resting place. Rainless weeks settled over the mountain and cisterns sank inch by inch. The Tide Lord, renamed Malik by his own request, the Arabic word for king now ironically divorced from power, labored beside the mason digging deeper wells. He fascinated the children by recounting his transformation, how the hum of drums that once fueled his authority now echoed inside his skull as a penitential metronome. "Every beat reminds me to pause before I speak," he admitted. Some nights he wandered to the ridge and remained until dawn, reciting by rote what Quranic fragments he had gleaned from overheard lessons. Nuh watched quietly from a distance, noting the way the man's silhouette seemed carved thinner each morning, as if guilt, like a sculptor, was chiseling away what could not stand. During that drought, a scarlet comet scored the sky, so bright it seemed daylight had been yanked forward by hours. Panic fluttered through tents, the old superstition rearing. Malik stumbled toward Nuh, voice raw. "Is this the second wrath? Does the sky mark me?" Nuh placed a calming hand on his shoulder and quoted Surah Al-Inshikak, "O man, you are laboring toward your Lord with great exertion and will meet him." Then he explained the comet as a sign neither purely wrathful nor purely benign, a reminder of scale. "Even a stone of ice and fire obeys orbit decreed by the merciful," he said. "Our task is to ensure our hearts obey with equal diligence." The comet's tail lingered blister-red for nights, then faded. Rains returned as if released from heavenly queue. Harvests rebounded, and in the calm that followed, the settlement collectively realized a decade had slid beneath them. Infants born on the ark toddled now between loom huts, Samira's hair silvered, Nuh's beard whitened like driftwood left in sun. Time's passing shifted from something measured by survival milestones to a fabric of anniversaries. First planting, first intermarriage, first death by natural old age rather than catastrophe. They buried that first elder beneath a young fig tree, and Nuh personally carved on the grave marker 2 verses, one from Surah Yusin, peace, a word from a merciful Lord, and one from Surah Ar-Rahman, which of your Lord's favors will you deny? Yet complacency is a weed that seeds itself in prosperity. Among the adolescent generation, those who had never known the valley's idols nor the ark's pitch-black hold, restlessness frothed. They adored stories of the grandfather flood in the way spoiled heirs adore family legends that cost them nothing. They practiced archery on fig trunks, boasted plans to explore ranges beyond the horizon, and some began wearing amulets stamped with the original thumbprint seal, ironic tokens of identity that slid dangerously close to talismanic pride. Cabell, now mentor to several of these youths, caught a boy kissing the amulet before firing an arrow. He scolded gently, reminding him the seal was not a charm. The boy rolled his eyes, muttering that Nuh's rules belonged to rainy seasons, not to clear skies. Word reached Nuh, who pondered long. He recognized that every revelation risks becoming mythology the moment memory thins. The Quran addresses the living, but when recitation dwindles to rote, it calcifies. He resolved to travel with a small band, including Yasin, Cabell, Malik, and the carpenter-turned-architect, to the coastal plains where rumors claimed an alliance of minor settlements was planning a pilgrimage to a newly erected stone figure. If idolatry is sprouting anew, he told the council, let us meet it where it blooms and offer living water before the vine tangles. His voice bore fatigue, yet beneath it thrummed an unspent resonance, like vibrations along a bowstring never fully stilled. They prepared packs of parchment, seeds, and medicinals. Yasin's cartographer's sketches hinted that the route would cross lands still scarred by salt flats, white deserts where once the sea had perched. Malik insisted on joining, believing his presence proof that even a former tyrant could carry peace. Cabell added a sack of clay tablets impressed with verses and a small kiln, determined to fire teachings into something durable but unidolizable. On the morning of departure, the settlement gathered at first light, mist furling around ankles. Nuh raised his hands and prayed aloud, his voice rasped by age but steadied by conviction. O my Lord, expand for us our breasts, ease for us our task, and loosen the knot in our tongues that they may understand our speech. He quoted from Surah Taha, the prayer of Moses, and the words felt cyclical, one prophet's plea echoing through another's journey. As he spoke, the sun breached the ridge and flared behind him, turning his silhouette into a glowing shard that seared itself onto every eye present. Children would later describe the moment as though Nuh had been poured full of dawn. They stepped onto the descending trail, staffs tapping rhythm. Behind them the settlement exhaled a collective breath, part anticipation, part sober awareness that history had shifted once more from harvest to pilgrimage. The widowed woman, her tapestry now spanning the outer wall of the main granary, stood on a boulder to watch until the party dwindled to specks. She clutched her prayer beads, those once broken spheres restrung years ago. One slipped free and she let it fall, content that a gap in the string was proof of use. As Nuh and his companions vanished into folds of rock, the wind gusted across the terraces, riffling barley heads in waves that looked eerily like water. For an instant everyone felt the past overlapping the present, the ark riding phantom seas above fields where children chased locusts for fun. It was a reminder that memory, like water, never truly leaves, it sinks, seeps, resurfaces in unexpected springs. The settlers turned back to their tasks, hearts both buoyed and weighted, knowing the Covenant's next stanza was being written beyond the horizon, guided by a hand unseen yet intimately felt. The dune line dropped behind them until it looked like a faint ochre lip against the sky, and for a time the travelers felt suspended between domains no longer of the mountain settlement, not yet of the coastal sweep that glittered ahead like hammered bronze under the sun. For 6 days they marched through salt flats where nothing moved but wind ghosts raising dust curtains tall as siege walls. The earth here crackled like pottery, each footfall rang hollow, echoing backwards so strangely that Malik muttered a verse of seeking refuge from illusions. At night they slept in shallow basins sheltered by mats tilted against the prevailing gust, and the stars above them seemed closer than breath, a cold, joyous reminder that even in the black waste of wilderness, order still arched overhead. Constellations tracing invisible calligraphy that spelled Allahu Akbar in a script only faith could read. On the 7th dawn they crested a rise and saw, at last, the new settlements, 3 encampments sprawled along a crescent lagoon where post-flood tides had carved a harbor out of white stone. Low walls of coral block ringed each camp, but the walls were half-hearted, more ceremonial than defensive, their battlements festooned with woven banners dyed indigo and rust. In the center courtyard of the largest cluster a slab of polished granite jutted so tall it dwarfed the nearest palm trees, and upon the slab crouched a sculpture, a woman with arms upraised, eyes hollowed into black pits, waist coiled in what looked like serpent scales. Even at distance the figure radiated an unsettling authority, as though granite retained memory of the ocean's old tyranny and was eager to reassert it. Yasin hissed a breath through his teeth. Malik lowered his gaze, guilty chagrin flickering. He remembered all too clearly how easy it was to bow to an idol that promised to cage your fear. Nuh said nothing at first. The wind combed his beard, now white as ash, and his eyes reflected the sculpture the way still water reflects storm clouds before a deluge, not alarmed, but deeply, sorrowfully unsurprised. They entered the camp openly, staffs grounded so their arrival made a ceremonial rhythm, knock, 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 like a patient herald refusing to brandish steel. Children paused mid-game to stare, women stopped weaving reed sandals, men glanced up from repairing fishing nets and squinted at the strangers draped in mountain wool cloaks. A runner darted away toward a pavilion of dyed sailcloth, and moments later an elder emerged. He wore a crown of braided eel skin, its sheen catching sun in wet flashes. His posture bespoke courtesy learned at the blade's edge, shoulders drilled square but chin inclined, ready either to greet or to command death. Na stepped forward, palms open. In the tongue common to traders he announced their purpose, peace upon you. We journey bearing grain, medicines, and a word that quenches thirst deeper than salt water. The elder's eyes narrowed at that last clause. He sensed the missionary note, but hospitality laws held. The visitors were offered shade and fresh coconut water tinged with cardamom. Conversations unfolded in circles, first polite, then probing, then tense. The elder, called Ser, described how after the flood the ocean receded like an embarrassed tyrant but left behind chaos, shoals choked with carcasses, currents erratic, storms that snapped masts without warning. To pacify the sea, his people had carved the granite figure they named Sealmat, she who binds the waters. Fish catches had indeed improved afterwards, or so Ser believed, and therefore the idol was credited. Malik, hearing this, felt shame pulse in his throat. How many times had he built fear into policy, attributing random fortune to cruel symbolism? Na requested a walk along the shoreline. Ser obliged. They reached a point where sea foam licked shards of driftwood and gulls mewed overhead. There Na spoke quietly, almost to the horizon. When water drowned the valley of my birth, no sculpture shushed it. Only the decree of Allah set bounds. Your improvements stem from currents stabilizing under his mercy, not from stone that neither hungers nor hopes. He recited an ayah from Surah Luqman. If all the trees on earth were pens and the ocean supplied ink, the words of Allah would not be exhausted. The waves answered with their hush roar, like applause muffled by distance. Ser listened, affected but unconvinced. We respect your Lord, he said, but perhaps he permits intermediaries. At that line Yasin bristled, but Na raised a calming hand. The merciful needs no courier for compassion, he replied. Intermediaries are for rulers who cannot be everywhere. He is Al-Qarib, nearer than jugular. An idol squats between giver and recipient, demanding tolls. Debate continued into dusk, campfires flickering like small planets across the sand. Kabul used his portable kiln to fire slender clay plaques stamped with short Quranic verses and gifted them freely, demonstrating scripture could be memorialized without mutating into worship object. These are reminders, not deities. Break them whenever you wish, the words will still live upon your tongue. Children watched plaques harden and marveled that holy text could emerge from red earth yet not claim dominion. Despite these efforts, a faction within the settlement, led by Ser's son Tariq, viewed the visitors as subversive. They feared that abandoning Sealmat would draw the sea's ire again. One night Tariq's followers surrounded the travelers' tent row, torches crackling, demanding they cease poisoning hearts. Tension coiled, Malik instinctively shielded Kabul, whose kiln flames shimmered behind him like fragile hope. But Na stepped into the torchlight so calmly that the men's aggression faltered. He recited Surah Al-Iql, say, He is Allah, one, his voice low but resonant, sailing over the waves' whisper. The oldest of Tariq's companions, a spearman with cataracts clouding his gaze, lowered his weapon first, whispering that the verse cooled something ancient in him. Others followed. Tariq, flushed and uncertain, barked foul curses then fled into the dark. The incident carved cracks in Selamat's authority. Doubt once kindled travels fast like spark across dry papyrus. Over ensuing days Kabul taught children to mold small wind flutes. They carved not figures but hollow channels, instruments for praise rather than objects of it. The sound of those flutes, piercing, bird-like, grew beloved. People gathered at dusk to share songs rather than sacrifices. Meanwhile Malik treated infections with salves from mountain herbs. The recovery of several feverish infants did more to convert hesitant mothers than any sermon. But the decisive moment arrived unexpectedly. A tempest, the likes of which even Ser admitted he had never faced, descended from open ocean during a crescent moon night. Forked lightning illuminated Selamat's granite face again, and each flash revealed cracks spiderwebbing her torso. Thunder boomed, wind-wrenched palm roofs, waves surged over breakwater walls, dragging fish baskets into froth. People stumbled from huts screaming prayers, some to Allah, some to Sealmat, most to any power that might hear. In the cauldron of rain and sand swirl, Tariq dragged ropes to lash the idol steady, convinced her fall would doom them all. Na, shoulders drenched, moved among panicking villagers, ushering them uphill toward the limestone bluff where travelers had pitched camp. He shouted verses of reassurance, with hardship comes ease, while lightning etched skeletal Morse in the heavens. Yasin, rope cinched around waist, ferried toddlers two at a time. Malik bellowed directions for securing goats. On the bluff they formed a ring, shielding weakest kin from wind. In the chaos a deafening crack sounded, Selamat's granite spine cleaved under hammering surf. The statue's upper section toppled forward, smashing upon coral reefs in a supernova of shards. Gasps tore through the crowd. Tariq, still clutching rope, stared wild-eyed as pieces of his goddess vanished into foam. Yet in that instant the storm's fury eased. Rain thinned, drizzle pattered. Within minutes the sea retreated like a chastened beast, waves settling into gentle shush. Dawn peeled away the last clouds, revealing wreckage but few injuries, thanks to the organized retreat. Silence hung, pregnant with implication. Some began to kneel in gratitude, facing east where sun stepped golden out of horizon. Others knelt facing the heap of broken granite, unsure which posture would bring safety now. Na raised his voice, hoarse but clear, witnessed the mercy that waits when hearts stop bargaining with stone. The one who stilled the flood stilled this storm, not for tribute, but to remind us his generosity is roof enough. Ser walked forward, seawater dripping from beard and sleeves. He knelt toward the east, not the rubble, and when he rose, tears cut rivulets through salt crust on his cheeks. We have been arrogant craftsmen, he confessed. Teach us to carve praise instead of idols. Behind him villagers echoed assent. Tariq dropped the rope, sobs racking shoulders once set like iron. Malik crossed to him, offered silent embrace. The young man clung as though to driftwood after shipwreck. For 11 days the travelers remained, helping rebuild dwellings on higher ground. They erected not temples but community halls where verses were recited, disputes mediated. Kabul, with local potters, molded a memorial, not of sealmat, but of a wave split down the middle by invisible hand, symbolizing the parted sea of mercy. It bore no face, no arms, and stood intentionally fragile so no one would confuse metaphor with authority. If ever pride bloomed, a single shove could topple it, reminding all who the true sustainer was. Na sensed his life's horizon nearing. Each dawn the walk from sleeping mat to sea's edge felt longer, each prayer more cavernous in his chest. Yet peace enrobed him, a warmth independent of failing sinew. One twilight he called Yasin, Kabul, Malik, and Ser to the bluff. Behind them the lagoon shimmered silver, moon's reflection quivering like a candle about to gutter. My bones are old arc-beams, he joked gently. Soon they will lay me in earth and new floods of forgetfulness may come. Guard against them. He charged Yasin to chronicle events truthfully, for memory is a boat. Lies drill holes in its keel. He asked Kabul to steward creativity, ensuring art remained servant not master. He tasked Malik with welcoming the wounded, for who knows better the map from tyranny to tenderness. Ser he appointed envoy to other coastlands, proof that lineage through repentance is lineage indeed. Finally Na recited from Surah as Safet, peace be upon Na among all the worlds. The verse felt less like farewell than passing torch, flame hopped heart to heart. That night a mild fever took him, nothing violent, just a gentle loosening of the threads tying spirit to clay. Those keeping vigil swore they heard rain, though the sky stayed starry. Others smelled cedar, as though arc timbers had come to escort their builder home. Before dawn he whispered the Shaida and smiled at some unseen shore, then quieted forever. Morning found the communities shoulder to shoulder on the beach, washing his body with water drawn from a brook sweetened by recent rain. They wrapped him in wool spun from first-generation mountain sheep, carried him to a sun-warmed knoll overlooking the tide. As they lowered him, gulls wheeled overhead in patterns uncannily symmetrical, no human choreographer could have arranged them so. Malik offered the funeral prayer, voice steady. Ser followed in his dialect, weaving Quranic phrases into coastal cadence. Kabul laid beside the grave a tablet of soft clay, unbaked, inscribed simply, servant, shepherd, shipwright. It would dissolve in the next shower, words released to soil rather than fossilized into idolatry. Life unfurled. Under Yasin's guidance, a braided road materialized linking mountain terraces to the coastal plain, its milestones etched with lessons rather than names: share water, guard truth, break idols of fear. Caravans traversed it, bearing millet, saltfish, linens, and, increasingly, ideas. Poetry glimmered with Quranic allusions, jurisprudence sprouted from debates on trade fairness, astronomy blossomed because curiosity was now sanctified rather than punished. And when storms rose, communities prayed in unison, no granite effigies required, their voices knitting across vale and dune into a single, immense canopy of supplication. Generations turned like great windwheels. Children grew who never heard the full terror of the first deluge, yet they recited its moral every season of rain. In the courtyard of the coastal settlement, a sapling took root where Sealmat once stood, nourished by shattered dust of idolatry. It grew into a tamarind whose pods tasted both sweet and tart, a flavor elders said mirrored the twin gifts of warning and mercy woven through the Quran. And on certain nights, when the moon scaled highest tide and the sea lay glass still, old ones told a story of a man who listened to a valley's heartbeat and heard therein the echo of the Creator, who built a vessel on dry earth and filled its hull with both timber and trust, who emerged to seed a covenant that could neither be drowned by water nor eroded by time. They told it without chapters, without tidy endings, for the tale was not a monument but a river, ever moving, ever ready to receive the tributary of any heart willing to flow toward the one. In the hush that followed such recitations, listeners sometimes fancied they heard would groan, as though an ark long turned to soil still shifted in its secret grave, reminding them that salvation is never static. It is a craft forever under construction, planks of justice, ribs of compassion, tar of unshakable taughted, awaiting the hands of each generation. And they would rise the next day, set tools to task, harvest to basket, verse to tongue, continuing the voyage on an ocean where the horizon is mercy and the guiding star eternal.